Today we're going to be talking about what might be the creepiest and weirdest and scariest episode of an 80s TV show, especially one that's supposed to be aimed at kids. I'm sure most of you all remember the show Punky Brewster. I think most of us watched Punky Brewster. It was a good show and definitely not too weird or scary. It had some sad episodes.
It exploded.
I don't think she's breathing.
What?
But for the most part, they were just, it was about normal everyday life. Now, if for some reason you're not familiar with Punky Brewster, it was about a little girl, an orphan, who gets found by Commandant Lassard.
Oh, yes.
And it's just about all the antics that she gets into. But there was one episode that came out from season 2. It came out in 1985. It was called Perils of Punky. And it was actually a 2-part episode. I watched Punky Brewster pretty regularly when I was a kid, but I don't remember this episode at all. And I don't know what the people who wrote this episode were smoking, but something ain't right. And we're gonna get into it right now. So the episode starts off completely normal. They're all going camping. Henry and Betty, who is Cherry's grandma, decide to take the girls camping, and they bring Margot and Alan along. And like I said, everything's normal. Henry and Betty are napping while the kids are playing, trying to catch bugs and playing horseshoes and what is this, badminton, whatever this tennis-like game is called. That is until Henry calls the kids over and tells them that they need firewood and that he's going to send them out into the woods by themselves to gather firewood, even though they have no idea where they are or how to get around. But it's the 80s. They, of course, get lost and they stumble across this creepy abandoned cave. Well, I guess all caves are abandoned, right? So Alan decides that they should go into the cave and explore. And since Henry told them that they should stick together, Punky says, I guess we gotta follow Alan into the cave. So they go deep into the cave exploring, and they come across a room that, first of all, it's got a campfire that's already burning. That should be the first red flag, but they still stay in the room. And then they discover that there's a painting on the wall that represents them. There's a dog and 4 kids, and all the kids look like them. And but still, instead of running out of the cave screaming, they just hang out and explore further. So they sit down at this campfire. As they're telling stories, they start to hear some drums, and then they say,
This is an Indian cave! Let's get out of here!
For whatever reason, Native Americans are supposed to be scary, and but it's okay because Punky knows how to deal with them.
How?
So the chief comes in and he sits down and he starts telling them how at one time there was this evil spirit that was ruling the land. But luckily there was this native princess, this little girl, who defeated the evil spirit. And now the spirit is coming back. But not to worry, because there's a new little girl that's going to defeat the spirit.
Wow, who is it?
You!
I beg your pardon?
So at first, Punky is not down with this, but the chief convinces her that, if she doesn't do it, then they're all gonna die. And all of a sudden, the ground starts shaking and the entrance to the cave closes up. And I feel really sorry for the dog during the scene. You can tell how absolutely terrified that dog is. There's not a lot of stuff that happens in the first episode. Honestly, this did not need to be a 2-part episode, but I promise you, when we get to part 2, things get weird. So they continue through the cave, and they get to a room where there's a bunch of glowing eyes watching them, and then they get to another room that's got a little hole in the wall with a green light. And they approach that hole, and they look inside, and this happened! Inside that hole was a giant marionette spider with a weird green effect on it, and that's when To Be Continued flashes across the screen. And so you would think that part 2 starts with them fighting that spider, but nope. It starts with them just exploring the cave more. Don't worry, because this is where things start to get really weird. And so they get to the next room, and then they see this. You cannot tell me that that's not creepy. I mean, again, especially for a show that's aimed at kids. I'm a 45-year-old man, and I think that's really creepy. So imagine being like 8 or 9 years old and watching this, and all of a sudden you see arms and legs growing out of the wall. It's just really weird. But so they don't go running out of the room screaming or anything. Instead, Punky decides to go over there, and she actually grabs the hand of the arm that's sticking out of the wall, and she lets it pat her on the head and grab her face. And then she tells the others, you know, don't worry, I think these body parts are nice. And so the kids start to calm down, and then Alan begins to wonder, I wonder where the head is. Hey, it's Mr. Vargas.
Have a heart.
And again, they don't run out of the room screaming. They just stand there and they have a conversation with Mr. Vargas. And he tells them that he doesn't know what happened. One day he was just going for a walk through the cave, and next thing he knew, he was in pieces. They continue through the cave and they come across this little cliff, and they're looking over the side, and Alan starts to fall in. And listen to this music for a second.
I know you didn't touch it. Get over here. Don't touch it. Why me, Mike? Mike, that ridiculous.
Am I crazy, or is that the Goonies music? They then stumble onto another room, and there's some light and fog coming out of the ground, and Punky reaches in and she pulls out this tomahawk that was apparently owned by Liberace. It's all covered in jewels, and she just looks at it and then throws it back, and they carry on. And then they get to another room that's got this gigantic spider web. But not to worry, each kid takes a turn crawling through the spider web, and they make it to the other side, no problem. But Punky is walking backwards, and oh no, it's the giant marionette spider. It's back, and it's got that weird green effect, and it's attacking Punky, and it's really awful. And luckily, Brandon, her dog, steps in and starts fighting the spider. And I gotta wonder if the dog actually thought that it was, you know, fighting some kind of big creature. But so anyways, all of a sudden, Liberace's tomahawk appears out of nowhere, and Punky picks it up. And this part is so disgusting. Maybe it's just because I'm arachnophobic, I don't know, but I think it's really gross. She takes it and she buries it into the back of the spider, and then this like creamy custard comes pouring out of the back of the spider. Is it just me, or is it kind of gross? I mean, look, even Alan can't believe what he's seeing. He's totally shocked by it. So the spider disappears and everything is fine, but then Margot starts to have a total nervous breakdown, and the audience thinks this is really funny.
Can't take any more of this. I'm a delicate person, you know. I have bird bones. Tweet.
But Cherry and Alan go over to Punky and they tell her that Margot's not doing too good, and then she must be able to see into the future because she gets shocked before anything actually happens, and then a few seconds later, Margot vanishes into thin air. Now at this point, Cherry and Alan start to freak out, and they decide that they want to go home. They're not having fun anymore.
I want to go home. Me too.
And Alan should shut up because this is all his fault. They wouldn't be in this cave if it wasn't for him. But anyways, they start to freak out because Margot disappeared. I mean, not because of the guy that was in pieces with his limbs coming out of the wall, or the giant spider, or any of the other stuff. Anyways, they continue through the cave, and then when Cherry and Punky aren't looking, Alan disappears. And then now it's just Punky and Cherry, but when Punky's not looking, Cherry disappears. You cannot tell me that this is not creepy. Punky's leaning up against the wall. Notice that little rock next to her, and she's pleading with the evil spirit, and then this happens. What in the heck? Who came up with that? Like, who thought that that was okay for a kid's show? Anyways, and then Punky turns around and this happens. And then, okay, this is actually really funny. That part actually cracks me up every time I watch it. Any old skaters that are watching this, that part always reminds me from one of Lance Mountain's parts on The Search for Animal Chin. So Punky continues on and she's talking with Brandon, and she was really concerned about the physical appearance of her friends.
They looked horrible.
And then finally, she comes across the evil spirit, who is transparent and very glittery and has very long, shiny fingernails. You know what? Maybe this really is the ghost of Liberace. It's very bedazzled. She's talking with the evil spirit, and the evil spirit says this to her.
You must die. The only question is, how?
You don't think that's a little harsh for a kid's show? Anyways, all of a sudden, the spirit of the native girl who once beat the evil spirit comes to visit Punky, and she tells Punky that the way to beat the evil spirit is with love and kindness. Of course, there's got to be a lesson here. And so then Punky starts saying really nice things to the evil spirit, and all of a sudden it turns into fireworks and it vanishes. All of a sudden, all of Punky's friends come back, including Mr. Vargas, and he's now all put back together. We find out that this was actually just a story that Punky was telling. But they're still in that cave, they're still in front of that fire, and there's still the pictures of them painted on the wall. So parts of it were real. I don't know. It's kind of hard to figure out. But suddenly, Henry and Betty show up to rescue the kids, and everything is fine, and they're reunited with the adults. And as they're leaving the cave, all of a sudden, the spirit of the little native girl shows up. So again, it was a story, it wasn't a story. I don't really know. You cannot tell me that that was not one of the weirdest episodes of an 80s TV show. Again, remember that Punky Brewster was aimed at kids. I mean, everyone loved Punky Brewster, but you know, it was aimed at little kids. I am convinced that the people who wrote that show were definitely smoking something. And the funny thing is the very next episode is the Just Say No episode. Coincidence? I don't think so. Now, when we first watched it, I assumed that it had to be a Halloween episode, even though there's no mention of Halloween whatsoever. It turned out that it did, in fact, come out in late October, but they actually have an official Halloween episode, but it came out in mid-November, so I don't know. So let me know in the comments, do you remember this episode? Do you remember watching it as a kid? And were you creeped out? And can you think of another TV show that had an episode that was even creepier than this one? And it doesn't count if it was, you know, a horror, like if you're gonna say Tales from the Dark Side or something. I'm talking about a normal family show that had a really weird episode. All right, that's gonna do it for this video. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.